Chosen one, look at you, sitting there, not even realizing how unstoppable you already are. This isn't just another message. This is your confirmation. You didn't stumble here by accident. You've been set apart since the beginning. Even when they tried to convince you you were ordinary. You've carried storms and still showed up with sunlight. You've walked through fire and somehow came out glowing instead of burned. Tonight isn't about begging for strength. It's about remembering you are the strength. This is your moment to stop shrinking for rooms that couldn't hold your brilliance and start walking like the ground was made to carry you. You're not fragile. You're not disposable. You're not just another face in the crowd. You are chosen. You are necessary. You are the evidence that darkness doesn't get the final say. And you're about to remind everyone watching exactly why you can't be touched. Take a breath. Square your shoulders. And get ready. Because when someone like you finally steps into who they were always meant to be, the whole atmosphere shifts. Let's go. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. There was always a quiet harvest taking place. Not of crops, but of hesitation, siphoned silently from someone who hadn't yet learned the weight of their own voice. At every pause, at every swallowed decision, invisible hands collected fragments of uncertainty, weaving them into their own sense of control. Doubt became their scaffolding. As long as questions echoed louder than answers, they could build themselves higher atop borrowed confusion. Lines were redrawn in chalk, so they could smudge them later. A refusal to shrink was recast as cruelty. A boundary became a crime. And all the while, one stood there, too patient, too kind, trying to repair breaches they never caused, believing that harmony required their silence. What they never revealed was that pain was not overlooked. It was consumed. It gave them a fleeting power, like standing taller only because someone else knelt. But what they never prepared for was this: the famine that arrives when doubt is no longer offered up like tribute. When thoughts sharpen and choices grow deliberate, the spell unravels. No more circling questions. No more pleading for understanding. No more justifying what was already whole. This is when the ground under their feet splinters, because their sustenance has evaporated, replaced by steady intent, unspoken confidence, and quiet resolve. The turning point comes not in protest, but in realization, the recognition of the game itself. And with that awareness, their grasp withers, leaving them clawing at what has already dissolved. The most devastating blow comes without noise, only a stillness that no longer feeds them. There once stood a threshold without locks or sentries, where anyone who approached could wander through unhindered. It wasn't just a door to a home, but an unseen passage to something rarer, an undercurrent of vitality and quiet force. Those who stepped close often mistook the glow they felt for their own, unaware it was borrowed. It was never their brilliance, but a reflection cast by the space they'd been allowed into. Some entered softly, while others wore carefully crafted disguises, intent not on connection, but on extraction. They lingered, drawing from reservoirs they neither honored nor understood, setting up camp in sanctuaries they had no right to name. That chapter is no longer open. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. The threshold now recognizes itself, no longer flung wide in thoughtless welcome. This closure is not born of bitterness, but of discernment, having witnessed what happens when openness lacks measure, how vitality thins, how the air grows heavy with burdens carried on behalf of others. From here on, access is not granted indiscriminately. The entrance remains, but it has become selective, attuned, guarded. This is not cruelty, it is precision. Not every outstretched hand deserves passage. The current within is sacred, and it answers only to those who come without masks, who bring no theft in their breath. Those who once slipped through unnoticed find themselves outside now, as the gate quietly seals with knowledge, not anger. What remains inside is intact, and the impostors are left beyond the threshold, bewildered and empty-handed. What was once an open field of conflict has become a sharpened edge. The struggle was never outside. It raged in the unseen layers of presence, where nothing was shouted, yet everything was felt. No fists were raised, no loud accusations thrown. Instead, quiet depletion crept in, unnoticed but relentless. Restlessness became the signal that something was feeding off strength. turning vitality into sand slipping through fingers. For a long time, the imbalance disguised itself as fatigue, distraction, unease without cause. Those who sensed it learned that if they could keep the inner rhythm off balance, forward motion would stall. And for a time, they succeeded. Then something shifted. The leaks were sealed, the patterns observed, and attention became deliberate. Encounters that once drained were left behind without explanation, not from fear, but calculation. It became clear that the force within was not simply something others observed. It was what kept them animated. The moment it was withheld, their influence fell flat. That same field of vulnerability evolved into an instrument of precision. Emotional outbursts faded. Arguments no longer mattered. Engagement with chaos ceased. What once scattered and bled into everything consolidated into a quiet, formidable presence. Those who thrived on confusion now find no doorway left to enter. The energy they once destabilized has hardened into armor and cut off their supply. What was once merely a place to attack has become a blade they cannot grasp. And the silence left behind is no longer weakness. It is the strategy they never prepared for. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Forgiveness once stood as an open invitation, offered easily, quickly, without hesitation. Not because harm was ignored, but because there was a deep faith in repair, that perhaps understanding would grow, that change would come. But what came instead was repeated disregard, as though mercy signaled permission to continue harm. Kindness was mistaken for weakness, second chances interpreted as infinite. Time and again, leniency was extended to those who never asked for it, never earned it, never intended to honor it. The cost was invisible at first, but grew heavy, a weight carried alone while others walked away untouched. Eventually, realization dawned that forgiveness carries value too great to waste. Its meaning changed, no longer scattered about to maintain false peace, but kept carefully, reserved for moments when it no longer empties the soul. This was not bitterness but clarity, understanding that forgiveness does not erase the truth, does not require reopening what was already closed. It severs the hold others believed they still had, without granting them entry again. That shift became the foundation of strength, calm, intentional, watchful. Mercy no longer functions as currency to buy back broken bonds, but as a quiet release, claimed for oneself. And when access is earned only by those who have truly transformed, the power returns to its rightful place. Relationships are no longer preserved through sacrifice. Freedom is guarded above all. And if others misunderstand this choice, so be it. Enough blood was spent on hands that never brought any care in return. From this point forward, forgiveness is not automatic but deliberate, and that to summon alone is enough to dismantle what once threatened to consume everything. Some changes carry a weight that feels almost unbearable because they're not just rewriting behavior. They're dismantling the very scaffolding that allowed harm to stand unchallenged. It doesn't just feel like healing. It feels like disassembling a whole hidden mechanism that's been turning for generations. The familiar scripts that others expected to see replayed, the silent compliance, the predictable apologies, the inherited fractures, are no longer being performed. Instead, what stands now is an interruption no one accounted for, a fracture in the pattern that nobody wanted to admit could exist. The expectations of those who came before, to conform, to repeat, to endure, meet resistance they can't explain, because this healing reaches further than surface habits. It digs into the foundation, breaking apart the coded assumptions and unspoken rules that kept cycles alive. That's why the air feels heavier, why relationships strain, why everything seems to quake at once, because the entire map is being redrawn. Not just the roads, but the ground beneath them. What is collapsing now is not destruction for its own sake. It's an intentional unmaking of what never should have been built. Every crack that opens makes space for something else, something unburdened by the weight of inherited silence. Those unsettled by the shift may mutter or retreat, confused by the absence of old compliance, unable to follow where this is heading. But this isn't meant to soothe anyone's discomfort. This is how the pattern ends. Not just by breaking a chain, but by melting the very mold that shaped it. What once imprisoned is now nothing but scattered dust, impossible to rebuild. And that is what real freedom requires. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. There are some who hid their motives behind borrowed language, wrapping themselves in the right words and gestures so convincingly that few dared to question. They mimicked what they thought holiness or wisdom looked like, crafting an image designed to impress, not to embody. And for a time it worked. Crowds admired them. Spaces welcomed them. Even the most discerning wondered if doubt was misplaced. But unease quietly grew beneath the surface, a sense that the shine was brittle, that something beneath the performance was hollow. That intuition was not mistaken. Simply standing near them, fully aligned and undeceived, was enough to send fractures through the illusion. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but simply by existing without artifice, without compromise. The difference became impossible to ignore. Their rehearsed confidence faltered when held next to quiet integrity. Their practiced lines sounded strained when met with calm truth. The performance they maintained for so long began unraveling, and the applause that once drowned out suspicion grew silent. One by one, the connections they depended on began to loosen. The stage they stood on began to shake. Not because of any public exposure, but because the presence of someone authentic shattered the fragile scaffolding they built. No need to argue. No need to unmask. Simply walking in truth stripped away their borrowed costume, leaving them face to face with what they tried to hide. And the silence that followed spoke louder than any accusation could. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. It's easy to misread quiet resilience as fragility when all someone sees is how much you hold without protest. Patience was mistaken for weakness, and unwavering presence was misinterpreted as being easy to replace. While others busied themselves playing roles, chasing recognition, and performing conflict, there was someone anchoring the space unnoticed, holding tension in place so it wouldn't shatter. They couldn't see that stability didn't come from noise, but from someone who stayed steady when storms rose. Instead of valuing that presence, they took it for granted, assuming nothing would shift because it never had. But now the thread has been pulled and the fabric is falling apart in silence. Without that quiet stabilizer, conversations stiffen, alliances fracture, and the air feels heavier with no one to ease it. Something unspoken is missing. Not just a person, but the calm that kept everything from collapsing. Those who once dismissed that role now watch the ground split beneath them, realizing too late who kept them balanced. What held them together wasn't weakness. It was strength wrapped in humility. And now that it's gone, the illusion of unity they clung to has crumbled into sharp pieces. The same loyalty they overlooked is what kept the chaos from swallowing them whole. And what's left in the wake of that absence is proof. What they mocked as dispensable was actually the only thing keeping them from falling apart. Some connections arrived disguised as blessings, but in truth, they are nothing more than open drains disguised as doors. Presence was presented as a gift, as if they were bringing light into the room, yet their steps carried only shadows. The more they were allowed in, the more the atmosphere dimmed, not because they were powerful, but because they quietly siphoned what was not theirs. Respect was never given, only demanded. Understanding was never offered, only expected. Chaos followed them like a constant companion, and somehow the burden of holding it all fell on someone else. The imbalance became routine, and yet the guilt for setting boundaries seemed to stay with the wrong person. Only now does it all come into focus. Those were not relationships, but quiet invasions, and access was never a favor but a breach. Invitations extended during vulnerable seasons became lessons written in hindsight. The door that once stayed ajar has been locked, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. What was once mistaken for closeness is revealed now as exploitation, and the silence that replaces it feels like restoration. There is no more bending out of habit, no more over-explaining, no more scrambling to soothe other storms. That faucet has been shut tight. They can reach, they can call, they can speculate, but they cannot draw from what they once consumed carelessly. What they thought they deserved has been revoked, leaving them to sit with the drought of their own making. That wasn't privilege, it was exposure. And now the fault line has been sealed, leaving them outside of what they thought would always be theirs. What once drew you into endless disputes and emotional traps now leaves you unmoved. There was a time when every jab, every accusation, every distorted narrative pulled you in, compelled you to explain yourself, defend your integrity, or prove your value. That cycle was their grip, and as long as you reacted, they stayed in control. Every flare of anger or rush of words became a signal they still had access to you. But that door is closed. The part of you that used to take the bait has grown quiet. Now there's no more scrambling to fix misunderstandings. No more spilling energy on battles already lost before they began. Responses have been replaced with calculation, noise replaced with intent. Each step is deliberate now, chosen, not triggered. The confusion they once thrived on has no purchase here because every choice is rooted in clarity, not provocation. Silence has become a strategy. Stillness has become strength. No longer scattered or volatile. Your presence is unervingly precise, unsettling to those who counted on your reactions to validate their power. This is not detachment but mastery. The focus they never thought you'd find has become your greatest weapon. When you step back now, it is not in retreat, but in command. The decisions you make carry a weight that cannot be challenged because they are final, quiet, and inevitable. You've learned the enemy doesn't need to be confronted head-on. It needs to be outmaneuvered. And now every move you make is an answer they cannot match, a refusal they cannot undo. There's no more defending your worth. There's only building what no one can undo, and moving beyond reach. Every attempt to dismantle you became the very process that refined you. What they thought would leave you fractured instead sharpened every sense, stripped away illusions, and forced your instincts to develop with precision. Each act of malice, each calculated silence, every manipulation was intended to dim what they couldn't control. Yet each one carved away what no longer served you, leaving something stronger in its place. Instead of shattering, you observed. Instead of collapsing, you adapted. You learned to read what wasn't being said, to notice what was hidden between the lines, to feel what others denied. They expected you to unravel under the weight of it all, never realizing you were quietly mapping every move, learning how to see beyond the surface. What they misnamed paranoia became discernment. Their rejection taught you sovereignty. Their absence became the space where your own guidance grew louder, clearer, undeniable. No longer seeking approval or chasing apologies. You've stopped needing validation entirely, because the truth reveals itself to you before words even catch up. That is not just survival. That is evolution. They underestimated how pressure creates not only cracks, but also unbreakable forms. What was meant to weaken you instead tempered your resolve, turning pain into insight, and leaving you standing in a power they never anticipated. You've become the evidence of their failure. Living proof that the harm they aimed at you only built what they could never destroy. Each success, each quiet victory, each breath of peace you now inhabit is the echo of their defeat, because what they tried to undo only forged you into something they cannot face. There comes a point when the silence inside stops sounding like pleading and starts sounding like command. Once, all energy was poured into asking, for the noise to quiet, for the pain to ease, for the weight to lift. Desperation made it feel like calm was something that had to be earned or begged for. Waiting became a ritual, as though stillness would arrive only if enough tears were shed or enough patience displayed. But that chapter has ended. There is no more waiting at the edges, hoping permission is granted. The authority to create calm has always been present. It simply had to be claimed. Now, when storms rage, they meet someone who does not flinch, who does not back away, who speaks into the chaos and ends it. This shift is not arrogance, it is ownership. Every step forward now carries weight, not because fear is absent, but because fear no longer dictates the terms. The atmosphere changes before a word is spoken, Tension recoils when you enter. The schemes that once pressed and now collapse quietly, unable to maintain their shape in the presence of certainty. This is not chance. It is the residue of every trial survived, every shadow walked through. The struggle is no longer a negotiation. There is no pleading, no bargaining, no asking permission. Peace has become something you impose, something you carve into the air with quiet precision. It does not arrive to comfort you. It radiates outward from you, establishing its own borders. The storm no longer dictates. You do. And everything around you has learned to listen. Every cut they delivered, every test they set was meant to unravel something in you. Over and over they pushed limits, pressed their weight, and waited for you to break. They thought silence meant surrender, thought endurance meant submission, thought kindness meant fragility. It was easier for them to see you as an experiment than as someone capable of consequence. They watched and calculated, prodding to see just how far the line could stretch without snapping. But it snapped, and not in the way they imagined. That quiet compliance hardened into something unmovable. Those endless trials only sharpened what lay dormant. Now the role has shifted. No longer the subject of their games, you stand as the reckoning. The version of you that endured has given way to the version that embodies what they tried to prevent. Someone who doesn't just heal, but transforms. Every insult, every rejection, every betrayal became a fragment of the armor now in place. There's no more waiting for their approval, no more hoping they change, no more giving them the chance to repeat what they've already shown themselves to be. Your presence now unsettles them without a word, because it reflects everything they mishandled and underestimated. You are not bitter, but you are unignorable. Not because of revenge, but because the balance is being restored through you. Without effort, the test has ended. The verdict is written in how you rise, how you move, how you no longer shrink. The scales have tipped, and the weight is no longer on you to carry. It has returned to them, and you are simply walking forward while the rest catches up behind you. Some carry a radiance others cannot resist approaching, and for a long time, that radiance was mistaken for something they could simply take from without consequence. There was always space for others to step closer, to feel better in its presence, to leave with their burdens lightened, yet never staying to return even a fraction of what they absorbed. That brightness was treated like an endless well, something to be tapped rather than honored. Over time, the quiet depletion became visible, a shadow growing behind the glow. But that season has ended. What once existed as a soft, constant light has transformed into something untouchable. A heat too sharp for the careless, a brilliance too intense for the insincere. This is no longer a safe harbor for the selfish. What remains now is an unyielding force, both warm and unrelenting, both welcoming and unforgiving, depending on the intent brought toward it. Those who once basked in it now hesitate, aware they can no longer draw freely from it without being scorched by the truth of who they are. What used to soothe now strips away disguises. What once comforted now confronts. There's no more tolerance for false closeness or quiet exploitation. Those who try to return with the same empty hands find nothing waiting for them but the undeniable clarity of their own reflection. The energy once given away freely has become its own barrier, protective, discerning, fierce. It illuminates what is real and destroys what is not. There's no more dimming, no more softening to ease others' discomfort. This is not bitterness. It is transformation, and everything unworthy of that glow is already turning to ash. Remaining quiet was never an act of fear, it was preparation. While others mistook stillness for defeat, every silence held its own kind of power, recording and cataloging every shift and gesture with meticulous precision. Every slight, every pattern, every mask was noted and set aside until the moment came. That quiet observation was never passive. It was the slow accumulation of something far sharper than any outburst could deliver. When the time arrived to move, it was not loud, not messy, but deliberate and final. What now emerges is not rage but clarity, not vengeance but authority. No wild swings, no scattered words, only a single, precise motion that cuts through everything false and leaves nothing to dispute. The strength lies not in the volume, but in the accuracy of what is finally spoken. A strike so clean it leaves no room for denial or recovery. Those who once depended on your silence now stumble. Unprepared for the truth, they thought they buried to rise so plainly before them. Every deception has been catalogued, every motive laid bare, and the evidence speaks without needing embellishment. There is no more shouting into the void, no more justifying what already stands clear. The stillness has become its own weapon, and the voice that follows it leaves no space for shadows to hide. This is not revenge. This is resolution, swift, irreversible, undeniable. Nothing left to argue, nothing left to contest. What they thought was the end of you was only the quiet forging of something they cannot withstand. Not noise, but presence. Not retaliation, but reckoning.